learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome back. Today we're diving into a really fascinating slice of Japanese history. And we're looking at it through this lens of instruction, how the government tried to teach or maybe guide the economy and society.
Exactly. And what lessons came out of that, both the good and, well, maybe especially the bad.
So where are we focusing?
We're zoning in on the time of Tanuma Okatsugu. This is after Tokugawa Yoshimune, then Ishigo, and under the 10th shogun, Ieharu.
Okay.
Now, Ieharu, he wasn't really running the show directly, which kind of opened the door for Tanuma.
Ah, right. And Tanuma himself, he wasn't exactly born into power, was he?
No, not at all. He started as a retainer, pretty low ranking actually, about 600 koku income.
Wow.
But he climbed all the way up, became a daimyo, a lord, and then a senior counselor, a roju, for 20 years. It's really quite the story.
20 years. So this whole period, the Tanuma era, it's really defined by his influence.
Very much so. And his attempts to, well, instruct the nation, especially economically. It's a great case study.
Okay, so let's talk about that economic instruction. What was the big picture goal?
Well, the shogunate's finances weren't in great shape, so Tanuma's main objective was basically rescuing the budget.
A familiar story.
Isn't it just? And his approach was quite innovative for the time. He believed the key was working with the wealthy merchant class, essentially instructing them on how to help the state.
So less about just taxing them more, and more about directing their activity.
Precisely. It was more strategic. He wanted to channel their power.
How did he actually do that? What were the policies?
Several key things. First, he set up government-run monopolies called za.
Monopolies. On what?
Things like copper and iron. Really essential stuff. The government taking direct control, you see.
Okay, got it. Direct instruction through control. What else?
He also really pushed the official recognition of merchant guilds, the kabu nakama.
Weren't those already around in some form?
They were, yeah, but Tanuma formalized them much more. And crucially, he started collecting fees from them.
Ah, the catch.
Exactly. Unjikin and Myogakin were the terms. It gave the guilds official standing, but they had to pay for the privilege. A new revenue stream for the shogunate.
So, a quid pro quo.
Mm-hmm.
Official status for cash. A clear financial instruction.
Mm-hmm. And then there was trade. He actively tried to boost production of certain goods for export.
Like what, for instance?
Dried marine products, tawaramono, things like sea cucumber, abalone, high-value stuff.
Okay.
He focused efforts in the Shimusa region to increase production specifically for export to China.
So the shogunate is literally instructing local producers, make more of this because we want to sell it there.
You've got it. It's a very top-down, guided approach to the economy.
Sounds ambitious. But these kinds of grand plans, they don't always work out perfectly, do they? Any examples of instructions going sideways?
Oh, absolutely. Ambition sometimes bumps up against reality. The big land reclamation projects are a prime example.
Where were those?
In the Inba and Tega marshes, also in Shimusa, the idea was sound, create more farmland.
Makes sense.
But then major floods just wiped them out. Huge investment basically washed away.
Oof. So a lesson there about maybe overreach or just bad luck with the weather?
Probably a bit of both. A tough lesson in the limits of control, definitely. Nature gets a vote.
Right. Were there times when the instructions met, let's say, human resistance?
Yes, indeed. There was an attempt to set up inspection offices.
Inspection for what?
Textiles and cotton yarn in Musashi and Kozuke provinces. The idea was probably quality control, maybe finding another way to collect fees.
And how did that go down?
Not well. The local farmers really pushed back. Hard.
How? Like protests?
Yeah, full-blown uprisings, icky. It got serious enough that the shogunate actually had to back down and scrap the whole policy.
Wow. So that's a clear instruction for the people to the government. Don't push us too far.
Exactly. It shows you really need buy-in, or at least you need to understand the local impact. You can't just dictate everything.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? Issuing instructions versus having them actually stick. And I suppose these new economic structures, the monopolies and guilds, they might have created other problems.
You're right on track. They did. While the goal was financial stability for the state, these new vested interests, well, they attracted attention.
What kind of attention?
Merchants looking for an edge, trying to get favorable treatment from officials involved in these new systems.
So bribery.
Bingo, it became quite widespread. Officials taking payments, merchants getting special deals. It led to a lot of disorder in politics.
So the intended instruction, let's organize the economy for the state's benefit, got drowned out by a different kind of instruction. Let's use this system for personal gain.
Perfectly put. This corruption really hampered the healthy development of those ventures Tanuma started. It's a classic negative lesson in governance, isn't it? Good intentions aren't enough if the system allows for widespread graft.
Yeah, oversight and ethics are crucial. Now, shifting focus a bit. The Tanuma era also saw Japan dealing more with the outside world, particularly up north. That must have required a whole new set of instructions.
It certainly did. We need to talk about Izoki.
Izoki, that's the old name for Hokkaido.
Mostly, yes. Present-day Hokkaido, plus the Chishima Islands, the Kurils, and Sakhalin. It was largely inhabited by the Ainu people.
Okay, and was it fully under shogunate control?
Not directly, no. The southwestern part of Hokkaido was controlled by the Matsume clan.
And they had a specific role, specific instructions from the shogunate.
They did. The shogunate gave the Matsume clan exclusive rights to trade with the Ainu.
So they were the gatekeepers for that region.
Essentially, yes. Their retainers would trade goods from Honshu rice, cloth, tools for Ainu products like furs and fish. It was the basis of the clan's wealth.
But then something changed. A new factor entered the equation.
Yes. Russian ships started appearing in the waters near Izoki. They were looking for trade.
Ah, okay. So external pressure. A new instruction, you could say, coming from outside Japan's borders.
Absolutely. This really forced the shogunate to start thinking differently about the North. They needed new policies, new instructions for how to handle foreign contact and manage this frontier.
Did people within Japan recognize this need, try to instruct the leadership?
Yes, some did. A key figure was Kudo Haisuke. He was a physician in the Sendai domain.
And what did he do?
He wrote a very influential book, the Akaizo Fusetsuko, and presented it to Tanuma.
What was the book's main point?
It argued strongly that Japan needed to trade with Russia and also actively develop Izoki itself. It was basically an instruction manual for a new northern policy.
And did Tanuma take this instruction seriously?
It seems he did. Based on Kudo's work and other reports, Tanuma sent out survey teams.
Really? To explore Izoki?
Yes, including a famous explorer named Mogami Tokunai. They gathered information, and based on their reports, Tanuma started focusing on increasing production of goods in Izoki that might be suitable for export or trade.
So he was adaptable, willing to learn and adjust policy based on new information, new instructions.
To a degree, yes. It shows an awareness of the changing situation.
But this whole situation, the Matsume trade, the arrival of the Russians, it wasn't happening in a vacuum, right? There was already a long history between the Japanese, the Wajin, and the Ainu people in Izoki.
Oh, absolutely. That history is crucial context. Wajin, people from Honshu, had been pushing into southern Izo, what's now Hokkaido, since way back maybe the 14th century.
Pushing in how? Settling? Trading?
Both. They built fortified residences, sometimes called the Southern Hokkaido 12 Mansions. And, well, they had superior military power.
Meaning they gradually took control.
Pretty much. They exerted control over the Ainu population over time. It was a gradual, often forceful expansion. One group instructing another through power, you could say.
And the Matsume clan emerged out of this.
Yes. Originally the Kakizaki clan, they became dominant in the southwest, especially after putting down a major Ainu uprising, the Koshimane War, in 1457. Later, they moved their base to Matsumai town. And in the early 1600s, Tokugawa Ieyasu officially recognized them. They changed their name to Matsume and were basically given control over Izoki, at least from the shogunate's point of view.
So they had the official instruction to manage the region. And how did that play out economically?
Well, the Matsume domain itself wasn't great for growing rice, so their economy relied heavily on that trade with the Ainu.
Right, the exclusive rights you mentioned.
Yes. They set up a system where high-ranking retainers were granted trading rights in specific areas. These were called basho.
And the retainers did the trading themselves.
Sometimes, but often they subcontracted it out to Wajin merchants from Honshu.
And I suspect this system wasn't always beneficial for the Ainu.
Unfortunately, no. It was often highly exploitative. These merchants would trade cheap goods like some rice, cotton cloth, basic ironware.
For valuable Ainu products?
Exactly. Salmon, herring, kelp, furs. The merchants often manipulated the exchange rates, used faulty scales, basically maximizing their own profit at the Ainu's expense.
So the instructions for trade were implemented in a way that caused real harm and resentment.
Absolutely. It's a grim lesson in how economic instructions, when unchecked by ethics or fairness, can lead to exploitation. The Ainu grew increasingly discontent.
Did it ever boil over into conflict again?
It did. The Shakushain War in 1669 was another major Ainu revolt against this system.
And the outcome.
The Matsume domain, with shogunate backing, brutally suppressed it. This just led to even more Wajin control and advancement into Ainu lands.
So by the time Tanuma and the Russians are on the scene, there's this deep, troubled history shaping the shogunate's view and instructions regarding Ezoki.
Precisely. And the Russian presence really accelerated things. It pushed the shogunate over the 18th and 19th centuries to start thinking of Ezoki not just as a trading outpost, but as, part of Japan.
A strategic shift in understanding.
Definitely. Which led to more direct intervention, more surveys, mapping expeditions reaching the Kurils and Sakhalin, and eventually putting parts of Ezoki directly under shogunal administration for security reasons.
And these decisions, these instructions from the central government, had massive consequences for the Ainu later on, didn't they?
Huge, long-lasting consequences. After the Meiji Restoration in 1868, Ezoki was renamed Hokkaido. Then came this intense period of so-called development, the Kaitaku,
Which involves?
massive influx of settlers from Honshu, modernization projects, but also deliberate assimilation policies aimed at the Ainu, forcing them to change their language, customs, way of life.
A very forceful kind of instructive.
Extremely. And sadly, it resulted in deep-seated discrimination and prejudice that, persists in some ways even today, a really sobering outcome of those earlier interactions and policies.
Wow. Okay, so alongside these economic experiments and foreign policy shifts, the Tanuma era was also hit by, nature itself, and social unrest.
Yes, the period wasn't exactly calm on the home front either. The 18th century in general saw a lot of hardship.
Like what?
Major natural disasters, famines. They were a constant threat. Mount Fuji erupted back in 1707, causing huge ashfall damage.
Right.
Then in 1732, there was the Kyoho famine. This was triggered by insect plagues, Unka devastating the rice crops in western Japan. Mass starvation followed.
Grim. These must have been terrible instructions from nature about the vulnerability of society.
Absolutely. And these hardships fueled discontent, which expressed itself in, other kinds of instructions directed at the authorities.
You mean protests, uprisings?
Exactly. Peasant uprisings, the Hayakusho Iki, became much more common across the country. People were crushed by heavy taxes and just deteriorating conditions.
And it wasn't just in the countryside.
No. In the cities, especially Edo, rising rice prices led to riots uchikawashi. Mobs would attack the shops of merchants they accused of hoarding grain.
It sounds like the protests themselves were changing, maybe becoming more widespread.
They were. Earlier in the Edo period, you often saw iki that were more like formal petitions led by village heads, representative actions.
Okay.
But by the 18th century, you get these massive general peasant uprisings, the Sobyakusho iki, huge numbers of ordinary farmers joining together.
And their demands were broader.
Yes. Not just tax relief, but also protesting forced labor, sometimes even directly criticizing corrupt local officials. It shows a growing kind of political consciousness.
And you mentioned village disputes, too.
Morikata Soto. Conflicts between the village officials and the regular peasants became more intense, and the urban riots, the uchikawashi, also grew in scale and frequency.
Is there any, physical evidence of this unity among peasants?
There is. A fascinating example is the Karakasa Renpansho, an umbrella-signed petition. From 1754, one example shows names written in a circle under an umbrella drawing.
Why in a circle?
So no single person could be identified as the ringleader. It visually represented collective action and shared risk. This specific petition demanded a corrupt magistrate be dismissed, a very clear, unified instruction.
Clever. And then things got even worse in the 1780s, right?
Yeah.
Towards the end of Tanuma's time.
Much worse. 1783 brought the massive eruption of Mount Asama.
Another volcanic eruption.
A truly catastrophic one. The immediate eruption was devastating, but the aftermath was even worse.
How so?
It caused prolonged cold weather reigai, which led to years of failed harvests, particularly in the Tohoku region, northern Honshu.
Resulting in?
The Tenmei famine, one of the worst in Japanese history. Hundreds of thousands of people starved to death. Entire villages were simply abandoned. A brutal, brutal instruction from nature.
Unimaginable. And this famine must have triggered even more unrest.
Absolutely. Peasant uprisings flared up again, and there were major uchikawashi riots in Edo, Osaka, and other cities around 1787. Society felt like it was fraying.
And where was Tanuma Ukitsugu in all this? Was he still in power?
It's quite striking, actually. He was dismissed from his post as Roju and had his lands confiscated in 1786, the year before those huge Tanuma riots hit the cities, and just a few years after the Asama eruption.
So his era ended right in the midst of this incredible turmoil.
Yes, the timing is very symbolic. His time of ambitious economic instruction ended against a backdrop of natural disaster and widespread social breakdown.
Could we talk a bit more about that Mount Asama eruption? It sounds immense.
It was staggering. The main eruption on July 8th, 1783, it threw massive boulders miles away. But the truly terrifying part was the pyroclastic flow.
That's the superheated gas and ash cloud.
Exactly. It surged down the mountainside, burying entire villages like Kanbara. Over 1,000 people killed almost instantly. The landscape it created, the Onioshidashi, or Devil's Pushout, is still there today. Just fields of jagged volcanic rock.
Wow.
And the ash cloud, it went incredibly high, maybe 12 kilometers up into the stratosphere.
And that caused the cold weather.
Yes, that massive amount of ash lingered up there for years, blocking sunlight, lowering global temperatures, and leading directly to those crop failures and the horrific famine, especially in Tohoku.
It's hard to comprehend the scale. Are there still reminders today?
There are. Archaeological digs are ongoing in places like Sumagoi Village, right at the foot of Mount Asama. They're uncovering homes, everyday objects, and even the remains of people buried by the mud flows triggered by the eruption over 200 years ago. It makes the human cost incredibly tangible.
So, looking back at this whole Tanuma era, it really does feel like a period packed with lessons, with different kinds of instruction.
It really does. You have the government's attempts at economic instruction, the ambition, the innovation, but also the pitfalls, the resistance, the corruption it accidentally fueled.
Right. And then the instructions coming from outside the Russians, forcing a new look at foreign policy in the north.
Plus the complex, often tragic history of interaction with the Ainu, a whole set of lessons about intercultural relations and exploitation.
And finally, these incredibly harsh instructions delivered by nature through famine and eruptions and by the people themselves through riots and uprisings.
Exactly. It covers so much ground: economic control, local governance, corruption, foreign relations, indigenous rights, disaster response. The list goes on.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How much do those lessons, the ones learned and maybe the ones ignored back in the Tanuma era, still apply today? When we think about economic development, good governance, dealing with other cultures, preparing for disasters.
That's the provocative thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
What enduring principles about effective leadership, about how societies learn and adapt or fail to, can we really pull from this turbulent, instruction-filled period hundreds of years ago? What resonates now?